"Hey, you loser!" heard Roger behind him, and immediately felt something hit him painfully between the shoulder blades. Roger turned around and saw his eternal offender, his classmate Mason. A pile of snowballs was lying around his feet, and it was clear that Mason had been waiting for him, for he knew that Roger would definitely be walking home this way. Mason was constantly clinging to Roger and did not miss a chance to mock the unsociable classmate. All the boys usually gathered behind the school gym to discuss girls or a soccer match, but Roger shunned their company and went straight home after school. There was rumours that the boy was taking care of his sick mother, who had been bedridden for several years with a serious illness, and it was true. There was no one else to take care of the woman, because Roger's father worked all day at the service station to earn money for the family and for his wife's treatment. That was why Roger, from a young age, learned to do all the housework. The boy used to do laundry, clean, cook, but he also studied very well. When his neighbour Floyd told the other boys in class about what Roger was doing at home, he immediately became an object of ridicule among his classmates. "He's a future housewife," laughed Mason. "Only he probably doesn't know that it's not necessary to study. Even such losers are taken in," he added wickedly, and all the boys laughed in unison. Mason's opinion was considered authoritative. His parents often went abroad and constantly brought their favourite son fancy things and expensive equipment. Since that day, Mason and his friends began to mock Roger often, trying to humiliate him, especially in the presence of girls from their class. But Roger always held himself with dignity and did not react to the attacks, and this irritated Mason even more. Roger lost his temper only once. It happened when Mason came too close to him and pulled the button of his old shirt and tore it off along with a piece of cloth. For a moment, Mason seemed even taken aback, but then, looking at his friends, who were standing far away, grinned and threw the torn flap in Roger's face. "That's okay, you can sew it on. You're a future seamstress, aren't you? Although, no, you're probably a loser, like your father, and you'll spend your life working for pennies at a lousy service station. Well, to each his own." And then suddenly, the always poised Roger grabbed Mason by the jacket. "I'm not a loser, got it? And neither is my father. He works there so I can achieve success in life because I deserve it, unlike you. And if you ever say anything about my father again—" "What will you do?" asked Mason with a challenge, hearing his friends coming closer behind him. "You'll find out then," answered Roger calmly, and releasing Mason, simply walked away. Mason wanted to continue the fight, but he was stopped by his friends, who said that Roger was a brave boy, unafraid to stand alone against all of them. Since then, Mason has held a grudge against his classmate for his humiliation, and if before this incident he had mocked him without anger out of nothing to do, now he began to do it purposefully, thinking over his every move. Once he even vandalized the chemistry lab and said that he had seen Roger go in there after lessons. Roger was saved from punishment by Tiffany, a local beauty and excellent student who had seen Roger at the pharmacy at the time. They believed the girl, of course, and Mason was just furious that this loser was lucky again. Many years had passed since then. The roads of the classmates had parted, and now they had decided to get together again. The task to find all classmates was given to Tiffany, who had already managed to make a successful career and become a chief accountant of one of the city's companies. On the eve of the reunion, Mason drove in a luxury car to one of the well-known chain car washes. Getting out of the car, he proudly went to the young man who was taking orders, and suddenly he was surprised to recognize Roger in him. A smirk appeared on Mason's face. Well, justice has finally been served, and this arrogant beggar got what he deserved, he thought happily. Oh, what a meeting, grinned Mason sneeringly. Turns out I was right. You've decided to continue the family business, he added smugly and laughed. Hello, Mason. You haven't changed either, I see. You still do not respect yourself, insulting the work of other people, replied Roger calmly, and started washing the car. The cold-blooded calm made Mason finally lose his temper. He already clenched his fists, but then he remembered the reunion, and an idea occurred to him. He took out his phone and began filming Roger washing his car. So, honest student, has your school knowledge been useful to you? You wash cars, so you're a loser after all, just like your father. Do you remember how we laughed at school that you would follow in your father's footsteps, and you shouted that it wasn't true and that you deserved more? But eventually it turned out as I had said. How ridiculous you are. Roger was silent. When he finished his work, he looked indifferently at his classmate and left without a word. Mason could not sleep all night, anticipating how tomorrow night at the party he would show everyone the video, under the approving laughter of his school friends, and finally he would be able to cause the smile of the unapproachable Tiffany, whom he had loved since childhood. He tried to woo her many times, but every time he got a polite refusal. A reunion was planned at the best restaurant in the city. The girls, in beautiful dresses, with beautiful hairstyles, and mature guys, looked at each other with interest, laughed, recalled their high school years, and asked each other how life had turned out. Waiting for a moment when Tiffany happened to be near him, Mason took out his phone and turned on the video, promising his friends an unforgettable show. Have you recognized this miserable guy? He was acting too smug, but never achieved anything. He must be so ashamed that he didn't even come here today. Everyone fell silent and watched the video, while Mason enjoyed his triumph. He felt like a victorious hero who had unmasked a worthless loser. When the video ended, some of his friends cheered him on, with a few caustic remarks. Some just laughed, and only Tiffany turned away indifferently. And in the midst of the evening, Roger appeared unexpectedly for all. He was stylishly dressed. An expensive Swiss watch was on his wrist, and he immediately attracted everyone's attention. The girls noticed at once that, judging by the absence of a wedding ring, Roger had not married yet, and immediately began a struggle for the attention of such a prominent man. Everyone had forgotten about Mason, who at first was bewildered, but then pulled himself together, throwing mocking glances in Roger's direction. Everyone started asking Roger about his occupation, but he only evasively replied that he was engaged in car washing. Seeing Tiffany, the guy was pleased, and they spent the rest of the evening together talking about everything. When people began to leave, Roger and Tiffany drove away together in his car. The rest of the men began to discuss Roger again and wonder about his business. In the end, they all decided that Roger and Mason just played a practical joke on them today, having shot that very video. "Well done," said Floyd, patting Mason on the shoulder approvingly. "How did you both come up with that?" "Are you all stupid?" snapped Mason. "Didn't you realize he had made a performance for you. Renting things isn't a problem now, and you fell for it, he said with a frown, and staggered out of the restaurant. A week after the reunion, the same car, which was previously driven by Mason, stopped again at the same car wash. Only the driver was not Mason at all, but an elderly man in a suit. In 10 minutes the car was clean, and suddenly a panting Mason showed up at the car wash and started hurriedly making excuses to the man in the suit. "I'm sorry, Mr. Young. It was the bus that was late." "You've got some nerve. Do I have to wait for my driver in the morning and then take my car to the car wash myself? Do you have any idea how much 10 minutes of my time is worth? I have already warned you that one more stunt like that and I'll kick you out. Of course, I gave your father my word to help you with your job because no one wanted you after you were released, but keep in mind my patience has run out. Get to the office any way you can. When you get there, come up to me. I'll decide what to do with you," he added, and slamming the door, drove away. Mason blushed thickly and nodded guiltily in response. Roger was watching all this from a distance. Today he was checking the work of his car wash and was on his way to meet Tiffany at one of the city's cafes. On that day, Mason had arrived for the first time. He was testing the new uniforms, so Mason had mistaken him for a regular employee. Roger wanted to say hello to Mason before the reunion, but when he heard his insulting remarks, he decided to play along and introduce himself as an employee rather than the owner. Now Roger was dressed in a perfectly fitting suit, and seeing him in his new look, Mason was at first confused and then, realizing the depth of his shame, almost fainted from the horror that engulfed him. Before Roger could even open his mouth, Mason could not refrain from insults again. "What? Are you rejoicing at my shame?" he muttered angrily. "You think if money came in, it can change what's inside of you? No, it won't." "You're right, it won't," Roger replied thoughtfully. "You know, I didn't study for nothing back then. The knowledge helped me start my own business, and now I own a chain of service stations and car washes. You're right, I continued in my father's business, and I'm proud of it. What about you? You never managed to realize your talent, although you could have been a great comedian, or at least a clown in the circus, because you always had a good language and a good imagination. Yeah, you were right. To each his own." Roger turned and went to the exit, but suddenly stopped and looked at Mason, who was completely crushed by his words, and said, "You know, I really do feel sorry for you. If your boss fires you today, you can come to me. I'll find you a suitable job. Believe me, you can still make things right and start your life over."